Well, we have reached the top of the hour, and so that we maximize our time together, we are going to go ahead and get started. And I do want to thank each of you for being part of this. This is part of the ABHE Leadership Development Initiative. And believe it or not, we've had so far 11 webinars through this COVID-19 crisis on a variety of topics. And we're thrilled that you have chosen to join us today to be a part of this webinar. My name is Philip Dearborn, and I am the President-elect of ABHE. I will begin my time as president on July 1st, and happy to fill in here today hosting this particular webinar. I do invite you to our website, abhe.org, and if you want to look there, there's a tab called webinars, and each one of these webinars are being recorded. So after today's session, if you do want to reference this particular webinar, you can go there. It will be there along with PowerPoint slides and any materials that are covered in our time together. Before I introduce our presenter, I do want you to know a couple features, how we're going to handle this particular webinar. Obviously, there's the chat feature in Zoom. I think all of us are becoming experts in how to work Zoom, but there is a chat feature as well as a Q&A feature. And I will be monitoring both of those throughout the presentation. And we do want to spend about 15 minutes or so at the end answering any questions that you might have. So feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the presentation on either the chat function or the Q&A function. I'll be monitoring those and then we'll get back together at the end and I'll pose those questions that you ask for Mark to answer towards the end of our webinar. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mark Griffin. He's the president and founder of In His Name HR. And Mark has been a frequent presenter as well as exhibitor at our ABHE events for the last 3 years. And Mark, thank you for your time and investment with ABHE. Mark has over 25 years of experience in both public and private sectors. If I name some of the public ones, in fact, there they are up on the screen, you'll see that he's a very well accomplished officer in numerous companies and has all kinds of HR experience. He's passionate about building high-performing workplaces by using best practices and strong values. If you know anything about Mark, he's very, very big on values-driven organizations. And what is it that drives, what is it that motivates our employees? He's a speaker, he's a consultant, he's an author, having written 2 books, which I highly recommend. He is married to his wife, Gail. They've been married for 33 years and have 2 adult children, and he lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So Mark, one, I just want to say thank you to you for your investment, for your time with ABHE as an organization. And 2, we're blessed to have you on this particular topic, a very, very sensitive one as we work through the COVID-19. So Mark, time is yours.
Thank you, Phil. I am very honored to be here today. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago, would we be in this situation as a nation, I would have never really believed it. We really are in tumultuous times. I thought things in 2008 were bad. You know, we had 9/11, but we're really in a difficult situation organizationally. Before I get into the material a little bit, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about our organization. We do have clients nationwide. We've been up and running 9 years. We celebrate 10 years next year. We originally started out with for-profit companies, and we started working with ministries and nonprofits. But then a couple years ago, we were introduced to ABHE, and we've been pouring in and doing the conferences, as Phil explained. And we have started to work with a lot of Christian colleges, Bible colleges nationally. So some of the Christian higher education organizations that we've served, Faith Baptist, ILT out in South Dakota, Taylor University, the Indian College in Arizona, Central Christian, Clark Summit, of course. So we've been able to take the best practices that we've used in high-performing organizations, like Phil explained with Merck, Quaker Oats, and take those practices and bring those into the college environment. You know, a lot of organizations think they're different than other sectors, but a lot of it comes down to the values of the organization, the mission, vision, values, and getting people aligned towards those mission, vision, and values. And that's really where I have a heart and why I wrote the book, How to Build a Kingdom-Minded Organization. And I know it's all your hearts, because that's what you're doing. You're raising up disciples. You don't know the student within your organization that's going to be possibly the next Billy Graham or be the next person to really impact the nations. So we're raising up disciples through the Bible colleges, and I'm really excited to be part of it. And I hope today I'm going to be very helpful in guiding through what I feel like the Lord was leading me to share with you as I put this presentation together last week. Let me first start with, and I always start most of the presentations with, this isn't legal advice. We're not attorneys. We're not equipped. I can tell you, however, though, I have a lot of experience, our firm has a lot of experience with legal issues, with EEOC, with all kinds of discrimination cases, age, pregnancy. We've been involved in a lot of legal cases. So we have a lot of legal background and legal experiences serving organizations, but we're not attorneys. So my prayer is that you won't take the information that I'm going to share with you, make decisions and not consult legal advice, especially if it involves a separation of employees or changes in the conditions of their employment. What we're going to cover today is really 5 crucial points. The first one we're going to talk about is reduction in force. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's more to kind of level set with each of the participants here to kind of define what furloughs are and layoffs, you know, what really is reduction in force. Then I'm going to go in really deep into, you know, what is reduction in force? How do you do it? What's the steps in the process? Some things that you need to do ahead of time before you jump into it. I've worked with organizations that went too quickly with reduction in force. They didn't think through it, and it ultimately hurt them. I'm going to talk a little bit about the narrative that you create too when you deliver messages, and it involves reduction in force, and how to do it with excellence and do it with grace. And there are ways of doing it where you can present it to an organization. Nobody likes it, but it might be a little bit more comfortable for everybody. I'm going to talk about communication keys, employee focus, organizational design, and also vision and value-driven organizations. All of these points are going to be kind of built into each slide that we present. So let me talk a little bit first, again, about reduction in force. And there's a lot of talk you hear in the news, also online, about what's going on with unemployment. And many people get a little bit, they're not certain what the different terms are. Really, in reality, a furlough, when people use the term furlough, it's a mandatory temporary unpaid leave. So when you furlough employees, it's really temporary. You have the intent on calling them back. So you're going to furlough employees, you're going to let them go. Now, whether or not they get unemployment compensation, which more than likely they would, depending on what state you're in, if you're paying in towards the unemployment compensation, I'm going to leave that to another discussion, because there's so many different variations per state. Or if we have Canadian colleges joining us, their unemployment is very, very complicated in the different provinces in Canada. But really, a furlough is just that. It's mandatory, temporary, unpaid. Now, a layoff And when properly used, when you use a term properly, that's a full separation from the organization. That means that it's really permanent, and it usually includes within an organization, if you can afford it, if you're blessed or you have people, donors, sponsors that are going to help you, that would usually include severance pay or outplacement. And you would say, okay, we're going to lay you off. Layoff meaning it's permanent in nature. We're expecting it to be permanent. So we're going to help you out. We're going to help you with severance pay based on how many years of service. And then we're also going to help you with outplacement, get your resume updated, help you steer in the right direction. We're talking a little bit more about what outplacement means later on in the presentation. But unlike layoffs, furloughs reduce labor costs without adding new costs, such as severance packages and outplacement services. So you need to be thinking about that. When business improves, employers do not have to pay for recruiting, selecting, socializing, reintroducing people to the workplace because they've already worked there. So there is some benefits to furloughing people, especially if you do think that you're going to call them back, because there are people that are already accustomed to your organization. You don't need to onboard them, and they know about your mission, vision, values, and what you're trying to do. So that's really the difference between furlough and layoff. I'm going to talk about reduction in force now. Now, there's really two types of transitions and separations in organizations, and this is in his name HR, Mark Griffin's experience definition. Others might have some things to add to it, but this has pretty much been my experience. You got a large scale reduction in force, and unfortunately organizations go through that. We deal with this on a daily basis. There are certainly colleges and universities that are doing large scale reduction in forces that we have been involved in, but also, as you know, as you're reading, in the last 20 years in the United States, we have large scale reduction in forces in companies. I worked for Kodak organization before the digital cameras came out. And at Kodak, unfortunately, I was involved with about 140,000 people losing their jobs because Kodak didn't have a new product. They had to let people go, and it was a large scale reduction in employment. So I'm going to go deeper into the large scale reduction in force, things to think about as you go into that. But also I want to address something that's always on my heart, and this seems to happen a lot, quite frankly, in Christian related organizations, nonprofits, churches, Christian colleges, Bible colleges, and that's the one-off separation for poor performance. I really pray that all of you that are hearing this, that if you don't have it, think about having a performance management system in place. You may be required to have that for accreditation, but how good is it? Is it being used on a regular basis? Do you have a performance improvement program, a PIP program? A PIP program is something that puts the burden on the employee to change their behavior and their performance, or they'll be separated. So, there's really, these are the two that I'm talking about, but we've gone into organizations, and the economy shifts, enrollment shifts, or donations slide, and they want to do a reduction, and the first thing that they do is they want to lump all the poor performers in and say, well, we got 10 people out of 100 that really should have been fired 5 years ago. Let's get rid of them right now. And really, my heart says it's kind of inappropriate to lump the poor performers into layoff circumstance. We should manage their behaviors, manage their performance, and have them exit the organization. I mean, the Bible clearly says you don't work, you don't eat. But I do find a lot of organizations are fearful to hold people accountable. One of the very big issues that you have, if you do have a layoff, say there is 100 people and you got to cut 20 people and 10 of them are the poor performers, and then you got to choose 10 more to leave, you're really telling the 10 people that were good performers, well, maybe you're bad like the other 10, or at least that's what they're going to think, or that's what the rumor mill is going to say. And we don't want to lump people into that category. We want people to be held accountable. They need to be directed to the results and then either let go because of poor performance, or when you do the large scale, then it's everybody with decent performance, people that you may want to call back. So that's really the two types that I'm going to be talking about today. Some of the topics I'm going to cover in this area here is foundational HR work. You know, you might be on a burning platform, and I get it. You might be really nervous about, are you going to maintain enrollment in the fall? Are the students going to be coming back? Or are you going to be able to have summer classes? What do you do with the students that left this semester? How are you going to work through that? Do you rebate housing allowance back to families? I mean, there's all these questions, and I understand that. And there's going to be decisions that you need to make. But before some of those decisions are going to be made, I really, again, I pray that you consider foundational HR work. And I'll go a little bit deeper into what foundational HR work means, but oftentimes we skip that because we're anxious to move on and we got to cut costs and we're worried about the viability of the organization, but it's really going to hurt you long term if you don't address it. And I'm telling you from my heart, I know this because I've gone through this so many times, either in private industry or corporate companies where there were layoffs and downsizings and foundational things weren't worked out. And it ultimately killed some organizations, unfortunately. They couldn't sustain because of it. I'm going to talk about, before you even begin, steps that you need to take before you go into looking at reduction in forces. I want to talk about taking the emotion out of the equation as you go through this. And look, I'm gonna tell you, I'm probably one of the most emotional people you're going to meet. I cry a lot. I have incredible empathy because of going through downsizing myself, knowing the feeling of, you know, this is my last day. I'm not sure what God has planned for me the next day. So I understand, but I do know that a lot of this is mathematical. If we're not getting the revenue in, if we're not getting the dollars in, and we don't have enrollment in, we just can't sustain some things. So we really intellectually, emotionally, we got to kind of stop for a second and pivot. And I've trained myself over the years to be able to do that, but you really got to take some of the emotion out of it. I'm going to go over mistakes often made. I'm going to go through that at the end as it relates to letting people go. Mistakes that I've witnessed, and I hope it helps you. I'm going to talk about after the pain too, because, you know, there could be some negative things about these adjustments, but there can be some positive things too if you take steps to make sure that it is positive. So let's talk a little bit about foundational HR work. We need to talk about what you should look like first. And what I mean by that is, you know, every organization should, and if you don't have it, you should have organizational charts, and it maps out who's in what positions, who are they reporting to, and you get a pretty good complete understanding. If you don't have organizational charts, something you need to do right away and get those in place. But you should be looking at what could you look like in the future. And a lot of organizations I work with, as they're growing, they create organizational charts with maybe 10% more people, headcount in those organizational charts, that add people to different areas of the organization, because as they grow and as they prosper, they're going to need to add additional staff. It could be in the areas of marketing. It could be in the areas of human resources. It could be in the areas of different staffing within any level within your organization, but it's pie in the sky. Now, we have to kind of reverse engineer that if you're thinking and considering reduction in staff of, okay, where are we today and where are we moving to in the future? And, you know, one of the things that can be most helpful is not doing this in isolation or not doing it in a vacuum. Many times when I was in vice president of HR and director of HR, I would be brought in and the other executives would be brought in, and the board of directors might simply say, we need to cut payroll costs by 20%. And then that goes to the president of the organization. The president brings it down across the organization. And then it was left to us as department heads to make that decision. So, you know, each one of the participants on today's call is going to have a different level. Some don't have a lot of staff. Some are much bigger organizations. But the more people that you can get involved in saying, okay, here's what the organization looks like now, and here's where we're going to, the better off you're going to be making that movement and having that input. It helps to set a strong foundation prior to the reduction in force, kind of takes some mystery out of it. If you can scope that out and have that into the future, and lastly, this is all going to hopefully come together towards the end of the presentation as I talk about some other concepts about what you should look like first. So to go a little bit deeper, before you even begin to look at reduction, it's critical that you have the following memorialized. And again, some organizations will say they have it, but then when we do go in and look at it, it's really not as good as it should be. And you know, the third one here is job descriptions. And it sounds very elementary, but moving forward into a reduction in force without job descriptions is just really dangerous. It makes it a little easier if you go and have organizational charts, the first one. You have those mapped out, and then you have the job descriptions underneath, and you can kind of map out, well, if I take these 3 positions out, how am I going to move those duties? Because those duties need to move out of someone's job descriptions and into somebody else's role. The other area that we find that many organizations just don't have is basic SOPs, standard operating procedures. I mean, basic things. Standard operating procedures is additional to job descriptions. Job descriptions are, you know, the essential functions, the educational requirements, the impact that the position's going to hold. An SOP is more like, what is the clerk doing on Monday? What is the payroll person doing on Tuesday? What are the steps that they need to take? So if God, you know, forbid somebody would die and leave us, there's some type of continuity to have in standard operating procedures so that we know what it is that people are doing. Some people call them desktop instructions. There's a lot of terminology to it. It's not that difficult to put together. Usually departments can help each other create those. So the optimal way before you even begin is to have organizational charts in place, basic SOPs for positions, and then job descriptions. And again, you might think it's elementary, but surprisingly, many organizations, many large organizations that we've gone into to help, their job descriptions are 10 years old. One last thing I want to add to job descriptions. We always find it's the best when the employee that's in the position is creating the job descriptions. And that's what we've done with a lot of organizations. Heather, who works for me and is named HR, she helps a lot of our college clients. We've gone in with trained staff on how to write their job descriptions. And then they work with their managers, they work with HR, and they work with us to kind of upgrade those job descriptions. But the days of a manager having 12 employees and the manager writing all 12 job descriptions, it just doesn't make sense. We're all about empowering the employee to write high-performing job descriptions. And it also goes into performance management. How does the employee take over the accountability of performance management? So these are 3 areas you need to consider before. Next, I wanted to talk about, you know, taking the emotion out of the equation. Having a strong foundation of job descriptions, SOPs, and knowing the organizational through charting really should take the anxiety out to what the unknown is. And I find when people get upset and they're nervous and they're worried about change and they're worried about what's going to happen to the organization and they're trying to do it all on their own or through their own leadership, that they're leaving it all out to chance. But I think if we have a good process in place and you have organizational mapping in place and you have agreement from the executives that working with you and the boards that are working with you, you're going to be in a much better place. But if you just try to push through it with happenstance, of course you're going to be nervous because you're just giving it a try. And giving it a try doesn't work, especially when you're dealing with somebody's livelihood and where people have blessed you with so many years of service into the organization, and you're making those decisions. And hey, look, at some point in any organization, whether it's a pandemic or just a downturn in the economy, we got to let people go. We do. And at some point, some positions, some jobs, they don't make sense anymore. That's something that we did 10 or 15 years ago. And we have new technologies. And we owe it to the organizations and the people that are staying behind, the people that are going to continue to operate and push the organization forward. We owe it to them to set the organization up for success moving into the future. So although painful, although we don't like it and I don't like it, it's something that we have to do as leaders. That's what we're called to do. Next, taking more emotion out of the equation. Use the job description program to your advantage. Use it to get people to update things. We work with organizations. We do recruitment for organizations, for instance, and we won't recruit without an updated job description. We want to know the person exiting the job description updated it, the manager reviewed it, the HR department. So it's a really good point in time to get that updated and relevant, and using it as a baseline to understand duplicate work or functions. We've found out in certain organizations, and we see this time and time again, especially in a college setting where things are decentralized and you have 4 or 5 different departments or different majors, and all 4 or 5 are doing the same thing in each area. And you know what? A lot of times those 4 or 5 things, they're not doing it good because it's not their gifting. We find that in recruitment. We find some organizations that they allow different departments to do the recruitment, and you got some departments using executive recruiters and they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on executive recruiters. You got other departments that are recruiting for the university that aren't doing it really well, and they don't look good out into the market because they're not good at recruitment. And the HR department, they're trying to help, but they're not really engaged because everything's decentralized. So, getting everything out on the table and looking at the functions of what people are doing, and then focusing on, what areas of excellence does our organization have, and how can we get that area into one department and let them focus on it instead of having 4 or 5 or 8 different departments doing it poorly. Also, the other thing in duplicated work or functions, I mean, we're starting to really realize as a nation and as organizations are now a couple weeks into this pandemic, yes, Zoom works, Skype works, FaceTime works. Things can be outsourced. We can do things really well with experts. I think of Bart Kaler. Is a friend of mine. He's in Indiana, and he's doing marketing and web design and all that stuff. He's blessing a lot of organizations because he's an expert in it. So why should an organization have a staff of 4 or 5 people and all this money that's involved when Bart could do it at a fraction of the cost? So I think as you're looking at job descriptions and you're looking at the organizational charting, not only are you seeing, oh, here's some headcount reductions we could have, it may stir some thinking that we're not really good in this area. We should outsource this to a subject expert that's going to do even better for us at a lower cost. So so the third point is also look at what parts could potentially be outsourced. And technology has changed how work gets done. And people are shocked about Zoom. We've been using Zoom for 9 years. It's a blessing. We can have a client in Arizona or California or South Dakota or Iowa, and we get to know them through Zoom. Heather doesn't need to travel. We don't need to send people out. So the technology has really changed. And, you know, there's certain pieces of technology that I struggled with in the beginning, but I'm really blessed by it. And my organization and our firm is really blessed by it because it's really helping to grow the organization in a way that we would have never been able to grow the organization had it been 20 or 30 years ago. So embrace technology. Don't be fearful of it. There's some great things around technology to get things done. Most of the time, reduction in force is simple mathematics. Like I said, when that regional director comes in and says, Griffin, you got to cut 20%, it's mathematics. I got to look at, okay, I got to cut 20%. What's it going to look like? Many institutions see enrollment plummeting, but staffing remains the same. Sadly, I need to tell you, 6 months ago or a year ago, talking to a lot of institutions, they would tell me, you know, enrollment's down 20%, it's down 30%. Well, what's your staffing look like? Oh, we're flat to growing a little bit. Some were growing, and I'm like, how could your enrollment be down and you're not adjusting your staffing or making the wrong decisions in staffing, letting marketing people go when you should be growing your marketing to get more students. So finally, in this area about emotion, if you keep it mathematical, it helps manage the emotional aspect if you are an emotional person. If you're not an emotional person, and that's okay because God's not equipped all of us to be emotional people, and we all have our giftings, as you navigate through this, if you know you're purely mathematical, engineering related, top line motivated, work with somebody within your organization that has those empathy skills, the emotional aspect to help you create the right narrative so it doesn't look too heavy-handed. We need to balance things out. That's one thing that we're pretty good at doing within our firm and working with teams is we like to do the Myers-Briggs type instrument as part of the first introduction with a team and the strength finders and kind of mapping people out because not everybody is a feeling person. And that's all right. You don't have to be a feeling person. But organizations need feeling people and they need to balance it out. So look at your team and look at the way that you're bringing the information forward. So you want to determine what level of reduction of costs need to be made. We talked about like the 20%. This should be done down to the department level. The lower into the organization that you can take it, the easier it is to equate it, and it's better to get the input of the management team as you go through the organization. And employ your leaders to ascertain what functions need to be eliminated or reduced. Don't put it on yourself because most of the times the leaders, especially in smaller departments, are going to see some things that they might be able to help you with. So let's talk about how to deliver the message. And you know what? I thought about this and I prayed about this. How to deliver the message really could be an hour-long webinar on how you deliver the message. But most importantly, I think when you deliver the message, you have to make sure that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, you're going in the direction most everybody's on board. You get the team, the executive team, to say you might not agree with this, but this is our final direction. I need your word that you're going to support this as we move it forward, because we can't have any naysayers second guessing or questioning after we move forward. I always think it's always important if there's messaging and say it's 100 people and you are going to let 10 people go, that you're able to bring the 100 people in. And maybe that's not going to happen in your case. I don't know. Seems like things are starting to open up across the United States, and you may have a window. You may have a window the next couple of weeks to do a reduction because it could close back up again. But you want to deliver as best you can with everybody together at one time in a way that's kind of thoughtful and brings everybody into one group. So you bring everybody into the auditorium, you have a mandatory meeting, and you have a narrative, the same narrative that's could possibly go out as a press release or go out to students or go out to parents, and it's for us to remain a viable organization. We've had to lower the amount of employees that work here, and unfortunately 10 people are going to be talked to today. We believe that by letting these 10 people go, we're going to continue to be a viable organization, and we're going to be able to function. And as of today, when this reduction is completed, we don't foresee any further reductions into the future. And then the group leaves, and then you go through to do individual team members that you're going to let go. And that's a whole nother narrative, that you're going to bring the person in with the human resource person. Now, I've told you something really important, and it's one of my pet peeves, is organizations, they kind of shotgun it. And I heard somebody say it the other day, it's kind of like shooting your foot off one toe at a time. So you're not going to tell anybody with a narrative at all, and you're just going to lay off here and then lay off there. And if that's good enough, then you're going to operate, and maybe you will do some more, maybe you won't. And I'm going to tell you, your people are going to live in fear. They're just going to live in fear, because they're never going to know, is this done with? Is it going to happen again? Are they going to lay people off next week? And it's a really, really terrible way to do it. I like to just go deep, hard, get it over with, and then move forward, because it's too scary for people if you're doing it sporadically. And I've worked in organizations that got destroyed because they just piecemealed it. And then what happens is people end up, they're supposed to work 8 hours a day. They end up working 2 hours a day, because 6 hours a day they're talking with each other on, when's going to be the next reduction in force. So you want to deliver it similar to the way that I've discussed. After the pain, getting the team re-energized, and we're in the home stretch with the presentation, because I have to open it up to questions here in a few minutes. I'm going to try to navigate through the next 4 slides fairly quickly. You want to communicate in person. So like after you make the announcement, you want to try to communicate with people as often as you can within your organization. You want to conduct focus groups and have employees give input on cost reduction. So maybe part of that narrative of saying, we have 100 people, we had to sadly let 10 people go, we're going to set focus groups up, and those focus groups are going to help us give input on further cost reductions, because it's our hope that we're not going to go through reductions again, but we're also feel like it's valuable to get employee input to take costs out at a greater level. And then do the focus groups. Have facilitators come in and let employees give ideas and thoughts on how you can cut some of the costs. Create a culture of continual process improvement. And I see this in organizations all the time. There's not process improvement. We got to be better than this. We got to streamline things. We got to be tidy. We got to be quicker at doing things. And we have to remember, all the students are looking at us all the time, and they want to see excellence. So create continual process improvement, goals and objectives, having clear goals and objectives within the organization on cutting costs, but enrollment. How are we going to increase enrollment? And never forget about employees' families as we go through this. And even if you're not going to reduce staff, don't forget about employees' families. It's always best to communicate all that you're doing to employees' families, so that when employees have a bad day, their families can remind them what a great organization it is that they work for. My son is 32 years old, and he still talks about when he was 9 years old, about how much the organization cared about the family when I was working at Quaker Oats Company. He felt like he was part of the Quaker Oats family because they did great things and they communicated. They communicated to spouses what great benefits they had. They had initiatives and picnics and things like that. And they were constantly talking to families. How can we make it better, not just for your spouse that works here, but also for the families that work here as well. So don't forget them in the communication. Use your mission, vision, values as a foundation of the communication that you do. You know, at the core of Christian higher ed is kingdom advancement. I said it in the beginning. We're creating disciples that are going to go out and give the message of Jesus to the world. And we need to never forget that. That's why we exist. We're not there for a job. We're not there to get a paycheck. We're not there. We're there to create disciples. That's what I feel like every Christian college and Bible theme should be. And we're really big on mission, vision, values. We love to create those with organizations and make sure they're built into the review process and the job descriptions. And people need to remember why they're there. They're not there for themselves. They're there to advance the gospel. So you want to build the mission, vision, values into every communication. And again, that could be a whole nother concept for all of you. But you really want to build the mission, vision, values into it. And then finally, limit being absent. And what I mean by that is many organizations, they do reduction in forces, they bring bad news, and then the president goes missing or the HR people go missing and everyone's hiding. You can't hide. You need to continue to communicate. If you're doing this and you don't have everyone back to work, have Zoom town hall meetings on a regular basis to get input from people, but really limit being absent or limit not being seen. Make sure that you're communicating or having your staff communicate for you through social media to let people know that you're alive, you're leading the organization, and you're still going in the positive direction. Oh, quickly, 5 mistakes. They go too quickly because they're forced because of financial situation. I talked about that earlier in the presentation. You don't consider the stay behinders. So what I mean is you're letting 10 people go, there's 90 people left, you gotta focus on those 90 people. Once those 10 people are gone and maybe you offer them outplacement or severance, you gotta focus on the 90 people. They don't manage the message, they get way off message. The message is you need to remain a viable organization. You can't remain viable at the current costs. You have to change things. They don't provide any outplacement services. Look, outplacement services aren't expensive. They really aren't. In the scope of things, they're very inexpensive. They bless people. They tell the people that you love them and that you care about them and you want them to go somewhere else and make an impact. And quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, we do a lot of outplacement for organizations. Many people leaving, if they're older in their career, they don't want outplacement, but they feel blessed that they were offered outplacement. So you're offering outplacement, they don't even take it, but you blessed them with the caring aspect that you at least considered outplacement for them. So consider outplacement. Leaks of confidential nature or early preliminary announcements, you know, that could be a disaster as well. You can have people talking about, oh, we may have to, or the president slips or the CFO slips, and we get this coffee table talk or rumors or innuendo, and that could really destroy organizations. And that's why I'm saying if you give a final declaration of here's what we're doing, the 10 people are going, nobody can debate it after that. You managed what the message was. More mistakes, confidentiality, not going deep enough. You know, you let 5 people go, knowing you probably are going to have to let 5 more go. Not controlling the narrative, not having a performance management system, not managing the poor performers, and then again, not having job descriptions before the reduction. So to recap quickly, we talked about foundational HR work. We talked about before you even begin, taking the emotion out of the equation. Again, personally, that's hard for me. After the pain, getting the team re-energized and going in the right direction, and mistakes often made. So we covered a lot of topics today. We just touched the surface of a lot of very difficult processes, but I hope it's been impactful for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil Dearborn. Thank you, Phil. He's kind of managing the questions, and I'll be here to help answer those questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. A fantastic presentation. And if you could hear us all clapping, I think all of the participants would be clapping. So thank you for the great overview. And boy, I can't help but think that if you as an organization, if you don't have some of those foundational pieces in place, now it's too late from one sense, but now is the time so that moving forward, you do have those foundational pieces in place for times such as this, making it that much easier for you as an organization to navigate what you have to do through these personnel situations. So a couple questions have come through, Mark. One of them from Garrett. Garrett, thank you for the question. Mark, how do you recommend getting mission, vision, values adopted into the culture of the employees when the employees are remote or just passing through the office, perhaps adjunct faculty or an online situation where your instructors are online and there's not that face-to-face engagement?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And one thing that I'll do is I'll share with Carol, and she can share it with the group, is I have a grid on different integration points for the mission, vision, values within every organization. But you know what? We highly recommend that you build your mission, vision, values from the very beginning into the recruitment process. We ask organizations when they're advertising to create a filter that when people apply, they're clicking on the mission, vision, values, and they're responding on how they're going to support the mission, how they're going to support the vision, how they're going to support the values. Before you even hire them, they're being exposed to the mission, vision, values. You're going to ask them when you do the recruitment through the interview process, how are you going to support the mission? You're going to build questions in an interview template to bring the mission, vision, values to that candidate. So the candidate's seeing it in the advertisement, they're seeing it as they're being interviewed, and then you know what? They're signing off for it when they sign for the handbook, because you have it on the second page of the handbook. And they're saying, oh, here's the mission, vision, values. And the president is referencing the mission, vision, values. And it's so important they have it in the handbook. So I could seriously talk for like another hour on this topic. There's all these different integrations points within HR that you can build your mission, vision, values into. And I'll get that chart out to you, and that should help you get some great ideas.
Great, thanks, Mark. That's a great question, Garrett. Thanks for asking that question. And to the participants that are there, if you do have a question, feel free to put it on the Q&A section, or go ahead in the chat function as well. Another question came through from Stephen Lennox. Stephen, thanks for asking the question. Mark, give us an example or some examples of outplacement services.
Well, we just plainly, we offer two different levels of outplacement. One's a quick start. It's basically simply 4 meetings where one of our consultants will meet with the person electronically. And most importantly, the first step is to manage their emotional piece. We want to manage the emotional piece of the person affected so they don't disparage the organization that they're leaving. So that's part of the investment, is managing the emotional aspect of the person that's exiting so that they can launch quickly, find other employment, and not be angry at the organization they just left. So we have a quick start. It's 4 meetings, but we also have one that's a little bit more in depth. Maybe the person's worked there 10 years and they're a little bit more senior. It's actually 12 meetings. It's 12 weeks long. It includes some assessment testing that we do with the person that's exiting. So it all depends on the level of the organization that the person's working in, whether they need a 4 meeting or they need a 12 meeting, and that pretty much sums it up.
Good, thanks, Mark. And I'm sure a lot of how well that goes is dependent on how recipient that person is to those services in perhaps a very particularly emotional time.
And that's a good point, Philip. And sometimes what we do with the organization is they give us the list, and we call and we reach out to the person. And, you know, I've gone through downsizing. Heather's gone through downsizing. We both actually had a career ministry for about 8 years at our church here in Lancaster, where we coached people that were losing jobs. So we're pretty good at managing the emotions. So we can call and let them know, hey, we're on your side. We want to help you. If you engage in outplacement, we're here for you. Some organizations, we go a little bit deeper, where we actually physically show up and we help with the narrative, with the message, and meet with people individually as they're leaving the organization. I mean, it's not work we love, because, you know, it's negative, but it's necessary. And we have gone to that point that we actually go to the site to help that team as people are exiting.
Good, good. One question, Mark, if you can talk a little bit, you had mentioned the category of furloughed employees. And as I've engaged with a number of ABHE schools, that's definitely one of the practices that's been used, especially for employees who maybe are physical plant related, in that yes, teaching is happening online, but the facility isn't being used. So talk a little bit, because those individuals are in some form of limbo, where they're not receiving compensation. How would you suggest the organizations who have put them into that furlough category engage in communication with them as time passes?
Sure. If it's say it's people working in maintenance or in your cafeteria or your dormitory services, I would actually try to communicate with them as much as you can, to let them know that you're thinking about them, that you're praying about them, that you haven't forgot about them, that as soon as you get more information on the state of the university or college, you're going to let them know what the next steps are. You know, in Pennsylvania, it's in flux, because they're debating whether or not to open Lancaster up, because they're saying Lancaster's falling into Philadelphia region. So there's all these different questions that you can't answer as an executive, but you can at least let the people know that we don't have answers right now, but we're going to try to get you answers as soon as you can. The worst thing you can do is not communicate at all. If you communicate not at all, they just think that you don't care. And it's not that you don't care, it's just you don't have enough information. So just simply letting people know, we're trying to get back to full employment as quickly as possible, but a lot of it has to relate to government, you know, state government, local government decisions that need to be made, and we can't make those formal decisions until they make the formal declarations.
Good. That's helpful, and you can never communicate enough, especially in those situations where they're not receiving compensation or having to go other directions for it. So, good. One final question, Mark, for the folks that are joining us on this webinar. What word of encouragement would you give to them? They are deeply engaged at their campuses. I'm sure they're working 8 days a week from home on these situations, and perhaps they've gone through some very, very difficult releases, people that they know, people that they care about, and having to communicate. What word of advice would you give? What word of encouragement would you give to them as they work at this every single day?
Sure, and this might be hard for some people, but I really feel overwhelmed to share it with you. And that's, you know, we have to be in prayer, crying out to our Lord to lead us where He wants us to be led, not where we want to be in the flesh. And, you know, I know what it's like to be involved in an organization and work 80 hours a week and have it fail and be left in a lurch with no employment. I know what it's like, but when I look back in my life at different circumstances that occurred, I realize I wasn't crying out to the Lord saying, Lord, lead me to where I need to be. I was crying out more, let me have what I've already created. And that might not be what God's has planned for you. God has an awesome plan for all of us. We know that. We have the eternal security of Jesus, and we know the end game of this whole thing. We're just all trying to figure out, where do we fit within the kingdom growth of what it is that God's calling us to do. And you know what? Some of you out there are going to have some honest discussions with the Lord, with yourself, with your spouses, because we know, because Ralph said it a couple years ago, not every Christian higher ed organization is going to exist. The numbers are just decreasing. It was decreasing before the pandemic. So I know it's kind of negative to say, hey, places are going to close, but instead of being the negative of, hey, it's going to close, say, hey, God, where are you going to take me? I got all these skills. I can impact the kingdom, and listen to God's voice to call you. Look, I would have no idea 9 years into In His Name HR that I would be leading an organization that could help so many people. I didn't have that set out in my heart. God revealed that to me, and He's leading me to help organizations. But I could have never done this on my own without prayer and without God's will. So thank you, Philip, for that question.
That's well said. It reminds me of my life verse, Proverbs 16:9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And you all of us are in this midst of making plans, but then also being open, obviously, to the sovereign hand of God as He directs steps for all of us as we do this very, very important kingdom work. So folks, hopefully this was an encouragement to you. Mark, thank you so much. You see Mark's contact information there. Mark does a great job working with our member schools. If you have additional questions, or there's something that you want to go a little bit deeper with him on, that's his contact information. And again, this will be posted on our website, and feel free to go back or share. If you go there, share with other people in your organization, in your institution, who may benefit from all of the other posted webinars that we have there. So I'm going to close our time in a word of prayer, and then we're going to end our meeting together. Father, I thank you for the last hour that we've had. I thank you for using Mark, your servant, to give us some sense of how to handle these very, very difficult situations as we work with the people within our colleges and universities. And God, I pray that as those who have participated have heard what Mark shared, we pray that the Holy Spirit will use Mark's words in their hearts and minds as they navigate through this crisis. And God, I pray if there's somebody in the midst of listening to this webinar who just needs that special word of encouragement, that you're in control, that you are using them in very, very important work. God, encourage them, use the Spirit to encourage them even this moment through this technology. Father, we love you. We thank you for the call that you've placed on each one of our lives. And we're so appreciative of the fact that you use us in your kingdom work. We pray this all in your name. Amen. Mark, thank you. And